A cold mist lies over the Atlantic, the kind of mist that swallows sound and memory. In the archive notes that survived the Second World War, investigators described it as unnatural silence. A British coastal watch station reported a shape rising from the water at dawn, slow, deliberate, and without lights. Through the fog drifted the silhouette of a German submarine. No radio call, no escort, no sign of life, just steel breaking the surface. The vessel looked as though it had been at sea only hours, not months. And when boarding teams finally approached, they discovered the riddle that would haunt naval intelligence for years. A submarine declared missing, now reappearing, spotless, with a freshly written logbook, but no crew. The Atlantic during WWII had a pulse of its own, a rhythm hammered out by convoys, submarines, and patrol craft. In 1943-44, when the U-boat war reached its turning point, Allied patrols constantly scanned the horizon for periscopes cutting through waves. In these waters, thousands died without witness. Ships vanished within minutes. Yet when the submarine emerged from the fog that morning, its timing broke all known patterns. Patrol aircraft flying overhead confirmed no other naval presence, no battle, no oil slick, no drifting debris. Just one submarine drifting forward with engines idle, carried by a slow current, like a ghost returning home. Inside, the story deepened. The typical U-boat patrol compartment was cramped, metallic, loud with engines and human voices. But when the boarding team descended into the control room, they heard nothing. No footsteps, no echo of movement. Every gauge sat in normal range, batteries charged, fuel reserves stable, food supplies intact. Even the air was breathable. There were no signs of panic, no bullet holes, no sabotage. It was as if the crew had stepped out moments before the patrol boat arrived, leaving their stations perfectly arranged. The periscope remained unlocked. The plotting table displayed a recent pencil line projecting a course westward. Charts lay open to mid-Atlantic grid squares used in 1943 for Wolfpack operations. Yet no crewman waited beside the attack scope. No officer's cap rested on the hooks above the navigation desk. The tension in the investigators' notes is unmistakable. Seasoned sailors writing about a place that felt more like an abandoned hospital ward than a war machine. The exterior hull bore scars from earlier depth charge hunts. Those who inspected the boat estimated it had been attacked weeks or months before, somewhere far south of its reappearance point. Depth charge patterns had hammered the flanks, but nothing penetrated. U-boats routinely endured such hunts. Damage alone couldn't explain the absence of the entire crew. The deck was spotless. Rope coils perfectly stored, hatches secured from the outside only after the boarding party arrived. No blood, no signs of drowning or forced evacuation. U-boats lacked enough escape gear for full crew abandonment anyway. The idea of 30 to 50 men all vanishing into the Atlantic without leaving a trace defied every logistical rule of naval warfare. Patrol sailors would later insist the submarine felt too empty, as though space itself resisted their presence. When Allied sailors finally entered the command corridor, their lanterns illuminated an eerie sight. Boots arranged beneath bunks, letters tucked into shelves, uniforms still hanging. No personal possessions were missing. The crew didn't have time or intention to pack. And in the radio room, equipment stood powered, dials active, receivers humming. The operator's headphones sat neatly on the desk. Someone had used the station recently. Someone had documented radio intercepts from Allied convoys known to have passed weeks earlier. It was as if the submarine had been in operation until the very night it surfaced. And then came the most unsettling discovery. The logbook, on the wardroom table, open, dry, perfectly legible. The last entry was dated months after the submarine had been listed missing by German command. The handwriting was steady, disciplined. Coordinates matched real convoy lanes from that period of the Second World War. There were no panic notes, no emergency signals, no mention of sickness, mutiny, or infiltration. Just a routine patrol ending abruptly with a final line. Maintaining course, no contact. After that, nothing. Naval intelligence officers were summoned immediately. The boarding team sealed the submarine's compartments, posted guards, and ruled out booby traps. Within 12 hours, the captured vessel was under tow toward a secure investigation port. The towing logs preserved from that night describe unusually calm seas, almost deliberate quiet, as though the ocean itself acknowledged the anomaly. Allied command wanted answers. How could a U-boat reappear fully intact after disappearing into deep waters months before? And why would its crew abandon a boat that showed no mechanical failure? At the naval base that night, investigators worked under blackout rules. War was still raging, and any intelligence gained from this submarine could not leak. Officers traced the boat's patrol route using its maps, rough arcs stretching from occupied France across the mid-Atlantic gap. They compared log entries with known U-boat radio transmissions intercepted by Bletchley Park. Patterns aligned too well. Whoever wrote those entries had access to operational intelligence consistent with surviving German records. But Germany had declared this submarine lost. No more signals, no final distress call. The Allies didn't understand how it could still have been patrolling for months afterward. Coded radio traffic intercepted earlier in the war was revisited. Some fragments mentioned U-boats experiencing strange acoustic distortions or crew degradation, vague terms from transcripts whose originals were often destroyed. Naval historians later speculated about contaminated air, chemical leaks from torpedoes, carbon monoxide poisoning. But none explained how the entire crew vanished without bodies, without life rafts, without damage, without signs of emergency respirators being used. When engineers dismantled the submarine under daylight, their technical reports noted every system remained operational: engines, pumps, hydroplanes, electrical circuits. The U-boat could have completed another full patrol. What it could not do was offer clues about its missing crew. Not a single fingerprint turned up out of place. No hidden compartment, no sign of enemy boarding. The dismantling team opened torpedo tubes, storage lockers, ballast tanks. All empty, all normal, all wrong. Then came the classified documents. Intelligence analysts compared the submarine's final months with convoy losses. No ships reported attacks consistent with its position. It was as if the U-boat drifted silently, shadowing routes without striking. One theory suggested the crew attempted a long-term evasion tactic, running dark to avoid Allied hunter groups. But such maneuvers demanded constant human oversight, not a vanished crew. Declassified archives decades later revealed additional details suppressed during wartime. German command had privately noted unusual behavior from some of its submarines late in the war. Extended radio silence, navigational anomalies, abrupt course changes. No direct connection was ever proven, yet the files hint at a broader pattern of uncertainty as the U-boat arm collapsed under Allied pressure. The submarine recovered by the Allies that foggy morning fit too many of those shadows to ignore. In the end, the ocean claimed the truth. War graves are not always marked by crosses or wreckage. Some lie in mysteries that drift across tides, in steel hulls found without the men who served inside them. Naval memorials list names, not explanations. The men of this submarine were never recovered, neither by Allied search nor post-war German archives. Families received only official notices of loss. As the horizon darkened that final evening of investigation, A lone ship moved westward into the dusk, its silhouette echoing the submarine's last known course. The sea that swallowed empires in the Second World War kept its final secrets. Some wartime mysteries leave debris, witness accounts, coded messages. This one left only a perfectly preserved vessel, a fresh logbook, and a void where a crew should have been. The war ended, nations rebuilt, archives opened. But the legacy of the Atlantic remains written in unanswered questions. Not every disappearance in World War II leads to a wreck. Some return, silent, intact, asking without words what happened in the deep. Under the sodium lights of the secure dockyard, the submarine rested like an artifact lifted from another century. Silent, immaculate, yet vibrating with the unspoken history of months at sea. Intelligence officers who approached the gangway reported the same sensation independently. The impression that they were interrupting something. Not a crime scene, not a battlefield, but a moment frozen. The steel hull still radiated residual warmth from engines that had run not long before recovery. Investigators logged that temperature, recorded it, and then stared at the data in disbelief. Nothing matched the official timeline of the boat's disappearance. Within hours, Naval Command convened a special review team. Engineers, signals experts, medical officers, code breakers, and 2 analysts from London attached to the newly strengthened Anti-U-Boat Warfare Division. Their task was simple in wording and impossible in execution. Determine the fate of the crew, assess the vessel's final movements during the Second World War, and extract any intelligence that could alter the Atlantic campaign. These teams worked through the night, submitting their first written assessments before dawn. The tone of those reports was unmistakable, professional but uneasy. They knew they were dealing with an anomaly that resisted every conventional wartime explanation. Back on the submarine, the boarding lights illuminated the cramped officers' corridor. Investigators moved slowly, noting every detail. Pens arranged neatly on a desk, a pair of spectacles folded on a shelf, a navigation slide rule left exactly where a captain might place it during routine plotting. None of these items showed signs of disturbance. The edges were sharp, undamaged, as if the boat had never been tossed by storms or shaken by depth charges. Some of the men felt uncomfortable staying inside for long. They reported the interior as too preserved, like stepping into a living ship that simply lacked its heartbeat. The radio room continued to puzzle intelligence specialists. Wartime operators were trained to leave minimal traces, no unnecessary notes, no unsecured code sheets. But inside this submarine, log sequences matched known Allied intercept records. Teams from Bletchley Park later confirmed that the order of entries corresponded to historically verified convoy reports. What disturbed them was the timing. The entries were fresh, dated, detailed. But every date on the page fell after the submarine had ceased all radio transmissions according to German Naval Command records. And even more troubling, after the date German Command declared the vessel destroyed. Whatever happened on board occurred long after the war's opposing intelligence branches believed the vessel should no longer exist. As towing continued, the crew of the escorting destroyer documented strange mechanical quirks. One engineer recorded how the submarine's rudder shifted slightly during transit, as though responding to pressure waves, even though all mechanical linkages were disengaged. Another noted faint flickers in interior lights triggered by residual charge. Normal for U-boats, but the timing seemed odd. A search for hidden crew, stowaways, or survivors repeated multiple times, each time yielding nothing. Every compartment, every crawl space, every tank, empty. The destroyer's commanding officer wrote in his private notebook that the submarine behaved like an animal accustomed to movement, forced unwillingly into stillness. By the time the boat reached port, the tone of the investigation shifted. The objective was no longer simply to search for intelligence. Officers wanted explanations, human explanations, but none came. Medical teams boarded to sample air composition. Results showed levels within survivable ranges for a crew of 45. The oxygen was neither stale nor dangerously low. The carbon dioxide scrubbers functioned normally. No evidence of toxic gas accumulation existed. This alone contradicted one of the earliest theories, that the crew succumbed to poisoning and were swept overboard or transferred elsewhere. Then came the deeper inspections. Engine rooms were clean. Tools hung on walls in perfect position. Fuel reserves were still substantial. Torpedoes were secure. There were no signs of panic or haste. If the crew abandoned ship, they did so without damage, without confusion, and without touching supplies. On the deck, investigators found light scoring on the main hatch. Someone attempted to open it from the outside, not the inside. This suggested boarding, not evacuation. But Allied intelligence confirmed no known Allied submarine hunter had been in that sector during the period the submarine disappeared. Even if an enemy boarding party had succeeded, there was no evidence of struggle. Naval Command feared a more disturbing possibility: a German boarding operation. But why would Germans forcibly remove their own crew? And how? The submarine logbook entries made no hint of rendezvous signals, shadowing instructions, or experimental orders. After dismantling began, technicians removed bulkheads, opened sealed compartments, and measured every structural plate. The hull bore no new welds, no patches, no signs of recent modification. Nothing internal had been altered. Whatever happened occurred without violence and without leaving a trace. The British Admiralty, recognizing the psychological risk of rumors during wartime, immediately classified all reports. Dissolving morale among sailors could cost the Allies dearly. Even so, word leaked. Whisper networks among crews spread stories of a ghost U-boat, a vessel that returned empty, its captain still writing in his log long after his death. Naval censors shut down the rumor, but not before crews across the Atlantic heard fragments, enough to unsettle men who already lived at the edge of fear. Meanwhile, analysts pored over coded radio transmissions intercepted in the months before the submarine vanished. Some transcripts referenced U-boats reporting unusual interference, machines that behaved oddly, navigational instruments that drifted without cause, unexplained knocks echoing through hulls. These accounts never entered official wartime histories because the transcripts were too fragmented to study. Yet in hindsight, analysts wondered, did these incidents hint at deeper problems within the German U-boat program? Stress-induced hallucinations? Unknown malfunctions? Or simply the fraying nerves of exhausted men living under constant threat? One line from a coded message recovered years later, likely from another U-boat, reads, "Crew complaining of sounds outside hull. No contact, no source." Another, "Night watch reports shadows at distance appear and disappear." Such logs rarely reached high command. German crews were discouraged from reporting anything that suggested fear, exhaustion, or instability. The Atlantic War demanded unwavering performance. But the submarine recovered by the Allies, clean, functional, and abandoned, suggested either an orderly evacuation or an event that left systems untouched while removing every human. And neither aligned with any known wartime scenario. Submarines were dismantled carefully, piece by piece, to allow intelligence teams to examine wiring, piping, and machinery for clues. In this vessel, nothing out of place surfaced. Every screw was accounted for, every fuse matched factory specifications. Nothing unusual, nothing identifiable, just an empty machine. This is where the investigators encountered the final unsettling detail. Within the captain's cabin, behind the chart drawer, technicians discovered a compartment containing a small metal box. Inside lay two signal pads, one lightly used and a sheet of handwritten coordinates matching the last date in the logbook. These coordinates pointed to a region of the Atlantic notorious for violent storms and known wartime wrecks. At the site, sonar sweeps decades later would reveal a scatter of debris from both Allied and Axis vessels. Nothing linking this submarine directly, but enough to reinforce a grim reality. The Atlantic swallowed countless stories, leaving neither answers nor remains. When war ended and the world attempted to rebuild, the documents related to this submarine remained locked in intelligence vaults for decades. Only in later years, when historians gained partial access, did they reconstruct the investigative timeline. Even today, the identity of the officers who wrote certain assessments remains redacted. The Admiralty's official stance, repeated in several memoranda, concludes that the most probable cause of crew disappearance is unknown operational failure compounded by environmental factors. Yet every engineer, sailor, and analyst who witnessed the vessel disagreed privately. Operational failure leaves fingerprints. Environmental hazards leave scars. This submarine bore neither. The ocean graveyards of WWII hold thousands of wrecks, rusting destroyers, crushed submarines, merchant hulls decaying slowly on the seabed. They tell the stories the war could not. But this submarine, this vessel that refused to sink, refused to reveal, belongs to another category entirely. It reappeared whole, contradicting the very war that created it. Naval memorials list the names of the missing crewmen. Their families never received closure. Their letters never returned. Their fates remain unmarked, unclaimed, unconfirmed. Some historians believe the men died in ways the records simply cannot capture. Others suspect a catastrophic but silent malfunction forced the crew out during rough weather. But the timeline undermines all such theories. The boat's condition suggests no such storm, no such emergency, no such chaos. So the final question remains unchanged from the moment the submarine emerged from the fog. If the boat completed its patrol, if it logged new entries, if it navigated precisely and maintained power, then where did the crew go? As the last page of the recovered logbook notes its final coordinates, its ink unmarred by seawater or time, we are left with a silence deeper than any trench of the Atlantic. A silence carried across decades, surviving war, reconstruction, and the slow release of declassified files. A silence reminding us that even in a conflict as exhaustively documented as the Second World War, some truths descend with the tide and never return. And somewhere beyond the memorials, beyond the breakwaters lined with names, a single unanswered question drifts across the horizon. In a war defined by destruction, how did one submarine return intact, yet entirely alone?